While headlines circled Jerry Jeudy and Deshaun Watson, it was a rookie tight end who quietly carried the Browns' offense. 72 catches, 6 touchdowns. No drama, no excuses, just production. In a year marked by dysfunction, his consistency highlighted the dysfunction itself. How could Cleveland invest tens of millions in stars like Jeudy and still miss the mark so badly? The answer lay not in individual failures, but in a broken process, a culture that rewarded flash over fit. If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed. And ignore what wins games: reliability. That culture is being dismantled. Andrew Berry is overhauling the Browns from the ground up, starting with protecting Sanders and ending the era of overpriced underperformers. A new WR1 is coming, but not one pick for sizzle, one chosen for trust. Behind the scenes, the offensive line is being rebuilt to finally give Sanders the space to grow. 2026 isn't just another season. It's the Browns' chance to prove they've learned from their mistakes. If not now, then when? The Cleveland Browns didn't just have a bad season in 2025. They had a season that exposed everything that had been quietly breaking beneath the surface for years. The offense didn't just struggle. It unraveled. And at the center of it all were two players who were supposed to represent stability and leadership: quarterback Shedeur Sanders and wide receiver Jerry Jeudy. On paper, the plan made sense. Cleveland paid big money to Jerry Jeudy, handing him a $40 million contract and a clear WR1 label. The expectation was simple: be the top target, be the reliable option, be the veteran presence who helps a young quarterback grow. Instead, what the Browns got was inconsistency, underproduction, and a growing disconnect that eventually spilled into public view. 50 catches, 602 yards. For a receiver being paid and positioned as a top option, that's not just underwhelming. That's a failure to meet the role he was brought in to fill. The Browns didn't invest in Jeudy to be a complementary piece. They invested in him to be a cornerstone, and he wasn't. While Jeudy struggled, a rookie tight, and quietly became the most dependable part of the offense. 72 catches, 631 yards, 6 touchdowns. He led the team in receptions, yards, and scores. He wasn't the player the offense was built around, but he became the player the offense leaned on. That contrast told a bigger story than any single stat line. It showed that reliability mattered more than reputation. It showed that effort and consistency outperformed hype. That gap between expectation and reality became impossible to ignore. And it wasn't just visible in box scores. It showed up in body language. It showed up in timing. It showed up in trust. Most importantly, it showed up in the relationship between Jeudy and Sanders. The sideline confrontation between the two wasn't a random outburst. It was a symptom. It reflected deeper problems inside the offense: miscommunication, frustration, a lack of shared accountability, a young quarterback under pressure, and a veteran receiver not delivering on his role. That moment put a spotlight on what many inside and outside the building already suspected. The Browns' offensive structure wasn't working. Shedeur Sanders' situation only made the problem more severe. He didn't walk into an offense built to protect him or maximize his development. The offensive line struggled, leaving him under constant pressure. Despite that, Sanders still showed flashes. He threw for 1,400 yards and 7 touchdowns in 7 starts. But he also threw 10 interceptions, many of them coming when protection broke down, and he was forced to make rush decisions. That's not just a quarterback issue. That's an infrastructure issue. Andrew Berry, leading the Browns front office, recognized that reality. Instead of blaming individual mistakes or pointing to bad luck, he acknowledged that the problems were systemic. The offense wasn't just missing pieces. It was built on shaky foundations: poor pass protection, misaligned roster priorities, too much money tied up in players who weren't delivering. The result was an offense that couldn't support its quarterback and couldn't maintain internal cohesion. Berry's response has been a philosophical shift. The Browns are no longer prioritizing flashy names or reputation-driven acquisitions. The focus has moved to foundational football. It starts with the offensive line. Protecting Sanders is now the top priority. Without consistent protection, no quarterback can develop properly. Mechanics break down. Confidence erodes. Decision-making suffers. Barry's rebuild puts pass protection at the center of everything. This isn't just about adding bodies up front. It's about building a unit that can give Sanders time to operate, time to read defenses, and time to grow. That shift reflects a more mature understanding of what quarterback development actually requires. You don't fix a young passer by throwing more weapons at him if he can't stand in the pocket long enough to use them. At the same time, the Browns are reassessing what they want at wide receiver. They are no longer looking for just athletic traits or big names. The target is a high-character, proven WR1 prospect who fits the system and the culture. Someone who can be trusted. Someone who can lead by example. Someone who understands that being a top receiver is about consistency, preparation, and chemistry with the quarterback. That approach directly contrasts with how the Browns handled the Jeudy signing. That deal, much like the Deshaun Watson contract before it, represented a belief that star power could fix structural problems. Instead, those contracts became financial and cultural anchors. They limited flexibility. They raised expectations that weren't met. And they created situations where underperformance carried even more weight. Watson's contract in particular has restricted the Browns' ability to maneuver financially. Jeudy's deal, while smaller, still took up space that could have been used to strengthen the roster in more balanced ways. Together, those decisions shaped a team that was top-heavy and fragile. When things went wrong, there was little margin for error. Barry's new direction is about reversing that trend. The emphasis is now on process, on fit, on accountability, on players who bring stability rather than volatility. This isn't a cosmetic change. It's a structural one. It affects how players are evaluated, how contracts are handed out, and how leadership is defined inside the locker room. The rookie tight end's emergence is a perfect example of what this new philosophy values. He didn't come in with massive expectations. He didn't come in with a headline contract. He came in and did his job every week. That reliability made him the offense's most trusted option. In a dysfunctional season, he became a symbol of what works. The 2026 season now stands as a defining moment for franchise. Sanders will be entering his third year. Historically, that's when teams decide whether a quarterback is truly the future or just a temporary solution. At the same time, Jeudy's contract reaches its final guaranteed season. Watson's dead cap impact begins to lessen. Financially and strategically, the Browns are approaching a pivot point. This is the window. If the rebuild works, if the offensive line improves, if Sanders shows real growth, and if the new WR1 integrates smoothly, Cleveland could finally stabilize. Not just for one season, but for the long term. That's how franchises escape cycles of rebuilding. They build around a quarterback with protection, structure, and dependable weapons. But if it fails, the consequences are heavy. Another stalled quarterback. Another wasted developmental window. Another reset. Another round of disappointment for a fan base that has already endured too many of them. That's why Barry's transparency matters. Instead of pretending everything is fine, he has acknowledged that mistakes were made. That accountability sends a message. It tells players that performance matters. It tells fans that the organization understands what went wrong. It tells the league that Cleveland is serious about changing how it operates. This isn't about hype anymore. It's about execution. The Browns are betting that stability will beat flash. That structure will beat star power. That fit will beat reputation. It's a quieter approach, but it's also a more sustainable one. The 2025 season was painful, but it forced clarity. The contrast between Jeudy's underwhelming production and the rookie tight end's consistency exposed what really matters. The sideline confrontation exposed cultural cracks. The offensive line struggles exposed how vulnerable Sanders was. All of it combined to force a reckoning. Now the Browns are at a crossroads. They can either follow through on this new philosophy and finally build something that lasts, or they can fall back into old habits and repeat the same cycle. The 2026 season will answer that question. So what do you think? Can this rebuild actually work? Can Shedeur Sanders take the next step with better protection and the right supporting cast? Was Jeudy ever the right fit for this team? Or are the Browns setting themselves up for another reset? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you found this breakdown useful, make sure to like the video, share it with other Browns fans, and subscribe for more deep dives into NFL roster moves, front office decisions, and the stories behind the chaos. The 2026 season isn't just another chapter for the Cleveland Browns. It's a judgment day for everything this franchise has claimed to be building toward. For years, this team has been clinging to potential. Next year has been the unofficial slogan. Promises were made. Big-name contracts were signed. Flashy moves were announced like they were going to fix everything overnight. But in 2025, reality hit hard, and it hit on live television. Jeudy was supposed to be the stable target for a young quarterback finding his footing. The franchise gave him a $40 million contract and WR1 expectations. And what did they get? A handful of solid plays buried under inconsistency, a weak 602-yard season, and a sideline meltdown that aired out the team's dysfunction in real time. That confrontation with Shedeur Sanders wasn't some emotional outburst in the heat of battle. It was a crack in the Browns' foundation made visible to everyone. It wasn't just about one play or one game. It was years of poor culture and leadership decisions boiling over. And while that was happening in the foreground, the background told a different story, one the franchise couldn't ignore anymore. A rookie tight end, underhyped and under the radar, quietly became the Browns' most productive and dependable weapon. 72 catches, 6 touchdowns. Week in and week out, he did exactly what the offense needed, without ego, without distractions. That alone should have been a wake-up call. The most reliable guy in the building wasn't a star. They had to develop him. That contrast between the expensive, underwhelming veteran and the humble rookie who carried the offense exposed everything Andrew Berry and his front office had been getting wrong. The problem wasn't talent. It was the structure they were putting it into. And Berry finally admitted it. He didn't play the usual game of deflection. He didn't point fingers at coaching or blame bad luck. He said what needed to be said. This wasn't about isolated failures. It was systemic, and the solution wouldn't come from signing more names. It would come from rebuilding the operation at its core. That starts in the trenches. The Browns had a quarterback in Sanders who showed flashes of real talent, but no protection. 10 interceptions over 7 starts isn't ideal, but the film doesn't lie. Most of those throws were made while he was running for his life. The offensive line didn't just struggle. It left Sanders exposed and made development nearly impossible. So Berry made protection priority one. Not temporary Band-Aids. Not aging vets on short deals. This rebuild is about identifying long-term solutions, linemen who can grow with Sanders, anchor the offense, and bring back some semblance of pocket stability. Because if this team can't give its quarterback time to throw, everything else falls apart. Every scheme, every route, every design rollout. It all dies if the defense is living in your backfield. But that's only half the equation. Cleveland also needs a real WR1. Not someone with hype, but someone with the right mentality. They need a player who will put in the work, sync with Sanders, and be where they're supposed to be on every down. They're looking to the draft, yes, but not for a superstar in the making. They're looking for a technician, a leader, a no-nonsense, high-output receiver who's going to grind in silence and deliver in the clutch. That kind of player doesn't just help on the field. He sets the tone off of it. Because the Browns don't just have a roster problem. They've had a culture problem. You saw it when Jeudy got into it with Sanders on the sideline. You saw it when no veteran stepped in to diffuse it. You saw it in the body language during blowout losses, in the post-game pressers where players seemed attached. And that's exactly what Berry is trying to root out. Cleveland's new blueprint doesn't just aim to fix protection or improve efficiency. It's about flipping the values this team has been operating under. They're done chasing upside over substance. Done giving contracts to players who aren't leaders. Done ignoring locker room dynamics until it's too late. And it's not just because it's the right thing to do. It's because they don't have a choice. The Browns have been trapped by their own decisions. The Watson deal locked them into years of financial inflexibility. Jeudy's contract may not be on that scale, but it's part of the same pattern. These deals didn't just clog the cap. They clogged the team's ability to evolve. They forced Cleveland to live with players who weren't producing and weren't helping. Now, in 2026, that starts to change. Watson's dead cap hit begins to shrink. Jeudy's contract enters its final guaranteed year. The team finally has room to breathe, and they cannot afford to waste that, because this is the year when the Browns find out if Sanders is the guy. By year 3, most quarterbacks either show they belong or get exposed. There's no more development curve to hide behind. This is a season where the excuses end and the evaluations start to stick. And Barry knows it. That's why the urgency is so high. If the offensive line holds, if the new WR1 delivers, if the culture shift sticks, Sanders will have no more barriers, no more dysfunction shielding him from criticism. This will be his team to run and his potential to fulfill. But if it doesn't come together, if he falters under pressure, if the protection fails again, if locker room chemistry implodes like it did in 2025, then this isn't just a missed opportunity. It's a failed rebuild, and Cleveland will be forced into another full reset. New quarterback, new coach, new vision. Again, the Browns have been here too many times before. They've seen promising year 2s. That went nowhere. They've seen stars flame out. They've seen rebuilds turn to rubble. But this time, they're trying to do it differently. And the stakes couldn't be higher. What makes this rebuild different is that it's no longer built on projections. It's grounded in accountability. The front office is owning past mistakes. They're not pretending Jeudy worked out. They're not pretending Watson was the answer. They're not trying to market their way out of failure. They're doing the hard thing, starting from the ground up, focusing on linemen and locker room guys before highlight real names. And that shift is what gives this season a pulse of real hope, not hype. Hope. The Browns finally have a shot to become a team that doesn't just compete in the first 5 weeks of season, but sustains it. They have a quarterback with tools, a rookie tight end who has already proven himself, a GM who's finally prioritizing stability over spectacle. The question now is, can they bring it all together? Because the runway is short. The consequences are clear. If 2026 is another disappointment, it won't be written off as growing pains. It'll be confirmation that the Browns still haven't learned, that they're still stuck chasing potential instead of building around performance, that they've built another house of cards. But if it works, if the plan actually holds up under pressure, then this could be the year Cleveland finally turns a page. For real this time. The Cleveland Browns don't get the luxury of quiet seasons anymore. Every move they make now is under the microscope, and for good reason. You don't get to hand out $40 million to Jeudy, watch him implode on the sideline with your rookie quarterback, and then ask for patience. You don't get to swing and miss on foundational contracts, and then pretend your process is sound. You either fix it fast, or you get buried under the weight of your own decisions. And right now, the clock is ticking. What's wild is that it wasn't supposed to unravel this way. The Browns entered 2025 with expectations. Not just fan-driven hype, but internal belief that they'd finally gotten the right pieces in place. A dynamic WR1, a promising young QB, a tight end room with upside, a coaching staff that finally had time to install continuity. But the moment that season started, cracks appeared. Jeudy's lack of urgency on routes, miscommunications with Sanders, red zone possessions that stalled, not because of talent, but timing, missed reads, broken protections, and then the rookie tight end stepped in and quietly did everything right. He didn't light up the league with deep bombs or jaw-dropping highlight reels. He just moved the chains, scored when it mattered, and made himself available on every key down. That contrast couldn't have been more obvious. The rookie tight end brought reliability. Jeudy brought noise. And when Sanders and Jeudy clashed on the sideline in front of cameras, that wasn't about one play. That was months of frustration boiling over. It was a young quarterback feeling hung out to dry, and a veteran wide receiver who wasn't willing or able to lead. That moment became the turning point, not just for the locker room, but for Andrew Barry. The front office had already been wrestling with cap constraints from the Watson deal. And now, their next biggest offensive investment was crumbling under pressure. That kind of misfire doesn't just cost you games. It warps the development arc of the players around it. So Barry did what needed to be done. He scrapped the blueprint. Gone are the days of chasing high-profile names without considering fit. The new philosophy is clear. Protect the quarterback, build a functional offense, and find players who want to be part of the system, not the face of it. And it starts where it always should have, in the trenches. For Sanders to become the player Cleveland needs him to be, he has to be able to stand in the pocket without getting blindsided every third play. The tape from 2025 showed it over and over. When he had time, he delivered. When he didn't, he rushed throws, forced windows, and the interceptions piled up. So now, Barry is pouring resources into the offensive line. Not splashy signings. Not patchwork solutions. Real foundational investments. Young linemen who can grow alongside Sanders. Coaches who prioritize technique and cohesion over sheer athleticism. The Browns don't need highlight plays from their front five. They need consistency. And once that protection is in place, it becomes about trust. The next WR1 can't just be fast. He can't just be strong. He needs to be in sync with Sanders on every route. He needs to run the right depth, be where he's supposed to be, and show up when the team needs a third down conversion, not just when the cameras are rolling. That's where the Jeudy experiment failed hardest. He wasn't dependable. He didn't give Sanders a safety valve. He didn't show leadership. He clashed. He vanished in big moments. And now, in the final guaranteed year of his deal, he feels more like a warning label than a solution. The Browns are now targeting the opposite of that. A high-character receiver in the draft. Someone with tape that screams effort. Someone who doesn't need a publicist to convince you they're a WR1. Someone who puts in the work, blocks when needed, and understands how to build chemistry with a quarterback still finding his footing. That's what this offense needs. Consistency over clout. And look, this rebuild isn't glamorous. It's not going to light up social media or dominate the offseason headlines. But it's what a real, functioning football team looks like when it's trying to actually improve instead of pretending it's a few flashy signings away from relevance. Because that lie, the one-piece-away mindset, is what buried Cleveland in the first place. They tried to shortcut their way to contention, and they paid for it. Now, they're starting from the foundation, the hard way, the right way, and it's all on a timer. If the 2026 season doesn't deliver progress, everything resets. Again, new quarterback, new front office, new head coach. The Browns can't afford another false start. Not financially, not culturally, not emotionally. The fan base has waited long enough. The league has moved on. No one's giving Cleveland any more benefit of the doubt. So this has to work. The new WR1 has to step in and perform. The offensive line has to hold. The culture shift has to stick. And Shedeur Sanders? He has to grow, show command, show consistency, show he can be the guy. Because if this doesn't come together now, it's not just another lost season. It's the end of this entire vision for franchise. So what's your verdict? Is this the year Cleveland finally gets it right? Or are we watching the slow-motion collapse of another failed rebuild? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit that like button if you're tired of watching this team get in its own way. And subscribe for more deep dives into the most dramatic collapses and chaos-filled turnarounds across the league. Because the Browns may be betting on structure and stability now, but history isn't on their side.